I just know so many families who watched their baby change after that Hep B shot, and some of them just changed drastically in their ability to relate in those first 24 hours of life, and some actually died. These kids were born during COVID when their life was full of fear. They didn't have the same social relationships that children before them had. People wore masks. They didn't see them smile. It's really pathetic what we did to this new emerging generation.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. This week we feature Patti Lemer. She is a writer, she is an author, she is an educator, she is a counselor, and she has been a licensed professional counselor for over 40 years. She used to come to the functional forums in Pittsburgh. You'll hear about that. But she is, kind of a central figure in the autism world. She wrote a book called Outsmarting Autism in 2014 that has been expanded. And now with her new book that I had the opportunity to do a foreword for, she is expanding and bringing that to new audiences. You'll hear in the episode there's some, incredible crossover and just, the life of a woman who has done incredible things to make people aware of the world as it is and how kids are in it and what we can do to keep them healthy and reverse some of the dysfunction caused by their unhealthy environment. Really interesting session and really grateful to know Patti. Enjoy. So a warm welcome to the podcast, Patti Lemer. Welcome.
Thanks, James. It's wonderful to be here.
I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to get into so many interesting topics that are related to chronic pediatric illness, your book. But it has to be said that on the day that we are recording this is the day that hepatitis B vaccine has been taken off the schedule for newborns by the ACIP committee. And I guess if you wind back to the first time that we interacted, maybe around the early functional forums.
It's like totally a miracle. My daughter's in her 50s, and I remember having to sign a paper that said no Hep B when she was born, and to never let her out of my sight so that they didn't jab her.
Yeah, well, times are changing, and you and I connected through some of those topics, and we'll get into to that generally. But yeah, I would say from my perspective, this just seems sort of like the low-hanging fruit of what can be accomplished when you have people who are really thoughtful. I think this brings us into line with other major European countries that have better outcomes, right. Both outcomes, pediatric outcomes better, but also, lifetime chronic illness better. And ultimately, right. If it was just a question of whether or not this reduced hepatitis B, which it doesn't, and you can see that the statistics show that there's more hepatitis B now that we have that shot than before. But then the second question is, what are the long-term ramifications, both for chronic pediatric illness and then for lifelong autoimmunity? And those are things that we don't know for sure, but I think that many people who have been around this industry and have been around the sort of the medical wreckage of, people who don't do well with it, see the signs of problems that need to be taken care of. So I'm really grateful to have you on this week and love to get your thoughts on it.
Well, I'm grateful that you wrote the foreword to my new book, Total Load Theory. And I just know so many families who watched their baby change after that Hep B shot. And some of them just changed drastically in their ability to relate in those first 24 hours of life. And some actually died. And so this is absolutely a day to celebrate, where we have gained health freedom on our ability to decide whether babies receive this shot.
Yes. Well said. And let's jump into it. So, you are a licensed professional counselor, practiced as an educational diagnostician for 40 years. You're an author and an educator. You've written these books. The first round of the book called Outsmarting Autism. I think that's kind of what you're best known for. And I know you've done other work as well. But I guess maybe you could just share a little bit about your pathway and journey to be part of this, how you ended up here.
So I ended up here because I questioned why. I always wanted to know why a child was behaving as they did. And I was fortunate enough to be working with a multidisciplinary team that included an occupational therapist and a nutritionist. And they informed me about some of the foundational problems with kids who were showing behavioral and learning problems. And that it wasn't just behavior and it wasn't just a learning disability. And so for years, I did testing with kids who had, quote, dyslexia and potential behavior problems, and did paradigm switches with the parents, asking about lifestyle factors. What were they eating for breakfast? How much sleep were they getting? How much time they spent outdoors? And even back 40, 50 years ago when I started, there were no screens. Kids played in the woods. And now we have the whole screen issue where kids aren't moving. They're working in 2 dimensions instead of in 3 dimensions. And there are just so many stress factors on the body and the brain that it's a wonder that any child is able to learn and be present and have language and social skills. And the body and brain are so resilient that they can overcome some of these. But my book, Total Load Theory, looks at what happens when all these stressors accumulate and a child's growing body and brain just simply doesn't have the bandwidth to solve the problem of too many stressors.
And ultimately, you've ended up with your organization and then merging now into the Epidemic Answers group. And I guess, why is it that you feel like autism is the sort of the critical coming together of this theory?
So autism is what happened from earlier issues with kids. When I first started in the late 60s, it was basically only genetic issues like Down syndrome. We didn't see environmentally caused behavioral and learning problems. In the 70s, we moved to learning disabilities. 80s, we moved to attention deficit disorder. And in the 90s, we saw the emergence of more and more autism. And it's the same basic issue with all the environmental and social stressing factors. And as they accumulated more and more, the children's diagnoses became more and more serious. And then you add on all that happened with the mandating and the masking and the isolation and anxiety during COVID. And all of a sudden we see some more mental health disorders increasing and emerging: obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, panic disorders, and a new branch that you are aware of metabolic psychiatry, where we have a group of psychiatrists led by Dr. Chris Palmer, who says, well, maybe these have something to do with what a child is eating and drinking and some of the lifestyle issues. So we've gone full circle in my 50-year career of looking at these issues. And autism is really described just as behaviors. Nobody had looked at some of the underlying biological and medical issues in autism. And it's the same thing all over again, but more and more serious.
Yeah, certainly, where all those things come together. Well, ultimately, it was a great honor to write the foreword for the new version of it. And first time it was Outsmarting Autism, now it's Total Load Theory. What led to the change in name, and what's the difference in the content?
That's a great question. Thank you. So Outsmarting Autism had 2 editions. When I wrote it first in 2014, I thought I was finished, and then all kinds of things changed, especially with children who are now non-speakers being able to communicate. A whole wave of spellers who we didn't consider having any competence. We're now assuming competence with them as we've broken through their silence. But as neurodiversity came along, it wasn't so sexy anymore to talk about outsmarting. They weren't interested in being outsmarted. And so the book changed somewhat, both for the reason that I wanted to reach a larger audience, the learning disability and attention deficit audience and the mental health audience, as well as being able to honor neurodiversity therapy and looking at these people as part of a continuum. And if they were suffering, if they were struggling, I wanted to be able to access them also. And hopefully they'll look at some of the biological and sensory issues that accompany their diagnoses.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the same physiological factors are happening at the root of all these issues. It's funny, when I saw Chris Palmer speak at the Integrative Medicine Mental Health Conference, I recognized that the same causative factors that he was saying were driving mental health were all actually driving also cognitive decline. And, it's very interesting to see that. I think, we're talking about the same issue just at the beginning of life and the end of life. Ultimately, the truth is, and the solution is that the solution is always the same, which is like to bring back health and function into the organs and systems by removing what's not meant to be there and putting more of what we need to be there. And it's actually extremely simple and actually very clear across all of the different, all the different areas, but we're definitely complicating something that is reasonably simple in my mind.
I think you're right. And years ago, when I started my organization, Developmental Delay Resources, Dr. Sid with Dr. Bernie Rimland was one of the first people who said, look, take out the bad stuff and put in the good stuff, which is basically what you just said. And it is simple. It's not that complicated, but changing people's habits is like hitting your head against the wall, and eating Twinkies and drinking Coke is part of the American way. And so many of these kids are malnourished. So many of them have sleep disorders. So many of them never go outside anymore. And some of those basic lifestyle issues, I learned more and more I had to include in the book. And they were not in the first book. And then I added a chapter on lifestyle. And then I added a chapter this time on nervous system regulation. Nervous system regulation, dysregulation because of trauma, because of panic, because of fear mongering. This is a whole new part of life that children today experience, with their parents being helicopters over them, telling them to be careful and be safe and go slow, and kids' confidence is undermined because they don't understand that they can do things themselves without depending on adults. Today's kindergarten teachers are saying they're seeing different kids. These kids were born during COVID. The 5-year-olds of today were born during COVID, when their life was full of fear. They didn't have the same social relationships that children before them had. People wore masks. They didn't see them smile. It's really pathetic what we did to this new emerging generation of kids.
I appreciate you sharing that. And as someone who has a child who is 4, the lengths that we went to sort of maintain as normal life as possible for them, which included, starting an alternative school and moving to the countryside was,
Wow.
was a lot, but ultimately you got to do what you got to do. But also, yeah, I'd love to just tap into, what you said about the nervous system regulation, because, we work actually one of the clinics locally, and one of the reasons why I moved here is friends of mine who are pediatricians who do incredible work, and they have a 0% autism rate in their clinic in California. But one of the things, and it's 0 with the kids that came into their practice, it's a little higher, and obviously because people come to find them because they actually have a history of reversing it in kids. And I think some of the special sauce that they have beyond the sort of functional medicine interventions of diet and lifestyle and maybe supplementation and understanding where dysfunction is happening is in the nervous system regulation work, particularly as it relates to things like craniosacral therapy is some of the things that is sort of standard in their operating system. And I've seen this firsthand for more than 20 years. When I was living in Connecticut, I worked with an OT there who worked closely with a number of doctors and had great success in that work too. And I just feel like the nervous system is sort of emerging as this key mediator for stress and health and disease. And so I'm glad that you're adding it to the total load theory.
Right. And it's so ironic because when I was working with kids with learning disabilities in the 70s, the neurologist, who was the first person that a pediatrician sent a student to for an evaluation, and I cannot recall one single traditional neurologist who came up with any solution. We're not able to say this child had a nervous system disorder. better. Yet, prior to that, when I was working with kids with diagnosed genetic disorders, I was fortunate enough to work with a neurologist who had us as part of a multidisciplinary team. And he was one of the first to use a ketogenic diet to stop seizures. So what goes around comes around. Here we are now with the metabolic psychiatrists having discovered the importance of diet, and especially a ketogenic diet with high fat, in a person's well-being. And so it's just amazing. It's like a dream for me, like today's dream of removing this Hep B shot at birth. Having a psychiatrist be considered diet is like a miracle.
Yeah, there's a lot happening in that end, and I think that it is accelerating, and it's exciting to see. When we started the Functional Forum, it was literally like an underground movement in that
Yep.
our events were underground, and you used to go to the events in Pittsburgh, right? Is that right?
I did. I had the place to go to watch the Functional Forum, and we would get 50, 60 people in Pittsburgh to watch you interview people. It was so much fun, James. It really was. And to get that number of people in such a traditional medical model town was remarkable. Pittsburgh blows off a lot of what we have to say, and I'm just hoping that soon we will have a center that is a little more open-minded about the body-brain connection.
Yeah, it's interesting. The brain, it does seem, I've sort of said that I think 2026 is going to be the year of the brain. And that's because if you look at all the different areas, on the pediatric side, obviously, we're really trying to understand what is happening to the brains of our children. And I think
Right.
you mentioned screens there, but even before screens came along, there were, significant toxic elements that were messing with the brains of children, causing inflammation or otherwise. And I think a key understanding of what drives brain inflammation is going to be critical, because if you go to the other end of the spectrum to cognitive decline, we are about to see the publication of the first placebo-controlled study in reversing cognitive decline of a functional medicine methodology. Can't share
Wonderful.
all the details, but look, it's about reducing brain inflammation and
It is.
understanding where the brain inflammation comes from, and dealing with it. And I think it's going to be pretty shocking to the rest of medicine to see, if you do that in a personalized way, what percentage of people get better. And I think it's going to be hard to say that we should be doing things the way that we're doing it, because, if you look at like number needed to treat, drugs don't work that well. They don't, the high percentage, they don't do what they're meant to do that often. They do it occasionally and for short periods of time. But the only way for us to really reclaim health at scale is through health.
Right. And using drugs without changing lifestyle, to me, is like trying to fill the bathtub with the drain out. You have to look at those basics. You have to look at food. You have to look at sleep. You have to look at movement. And I know that I can improve function in any child by focusing on those areas. And the parents are so stressed, trying to make a living, to do what they need to do to be, quote, good parents, unquote. And it's just overwhelming for them. And the demands, the social demands, the academic demands of society, our schools don't understand normal development anymore. Our pediatricians have changed the guidelines on developmental milestones so that we're dumbing down our kids. Crawling has been taken out of developmental milestones, and we know how important crawling is for integrating the brain. So even before the brain becomes inflamed, it has had impediments put on it in brain development. All those things that increase brain development, that increase neurons, those things have been taken out of childhood under the umbrella of safety. We can't let a child run around in the woods. We can't let him fall and pick himself up again because it's unsafe. And these safety ideas are misinformed. So children need to learn how to get out of trouble.
All right, we're going to take a little bit of a break from the interview just to talk about our mission partners and some of the tools that are available to you. If you're listening to every episode, you already know that we have mission partners right now that can facilitate you building the brain health practice of the future. So we talked last week about FullScript and some of the tools that they have to make it easy for you to run the details of running a practice day to day. They are the whole person platform, and they have a lot of tools to make it easy to just have one platform to organize your supplements and labs and so forth. So go to goevomed.com/fullscript, and we're going to be bringing you some of the tools that most practitioners don't seem to know about, but are really cool within them. We have freedom practice coaching. Go to goevomed.com/FPC, and you can really see where your practice is. And if you want to grow your practice, if you want to add another practitioner, if you want to grow your revenue, if you want to bring in new patients, if you want to, if you want to sell your practice to private equity, that's a good place to do. Come and have a conversation. goevomed.com/FPC. You can do the scalability assessment, get in touch. Freedom practice coaching is helping practices get their shit together, basically. And ultimately, if that's you, maybe you need to have that conversation. And Big Boost Marketing, Uli is the master. He has been super helpful in me getting this up and running. Super grateful to Uli. If you need to bring low cost discovery calls into your practice, speak to Uli. And then obviously True Neuro is in the business of helping people organize brain health. We have so many practitioners launching brain health programs. If you want to be one of them, it's synergistic with HRT. It's a really good fit if you have any sort of mental health focus in your practice. This is just a huge thing that's happening in society. And we have very exciting pending information, pending on the first placebo-controlled trial of a functional medicine methodology. So goevomed.com/TrueNeuro. These are our mission partners. We have some really exciting new partners that we're going to be announcing soon. Have you ever wished that you had a VA that was pre-trained in your EHR and knew how to use Serbo before you even used it? We're going to be talking about that soon. If that's interesting, get in touch with me, James, at GoEvoMed. We've got some exciting things coming up. This has been our mission partners. Let's get back to the interview. Yeah, getting out of trouble. They know how to get in, and then they need to learn to get out.
Right. Then they say, Daddy, help me. Teacher, help me. Mommy, help me. It's their brains and bodies are not connected because they haven't had the movement experiences that make vision work. And as you know from looking at my book, vision is one of my favorite topics, and how vision must emerge as the dominant sense so that we can ideate and organize and create. And if we depend on a GPS to get us from point A to point B, we're not having to think anymore. And that's a huge impediment to our children's development today.
Yeah, you mentioned the word vision. Your second book, Envisioning a Bright Future, Interventions that Work for Children and Adults with Autism Spectrum Disorders. What was it about vision that you felt was so compelling, and why does that play a big role in that topic?
Well, that book was actually my first book, and it was published by the Optometric Extension Program. I was asked to write that to help developmental optometrists understand the role of the other aspects of the total load, the nutrition, the movement, and how vision worked in learning and behavior. And so vision in English is used synonymously with the word eyesight. So when we do an evaluation and we say a child's vision is okay, what we usually are saying is that he can see 20 feet with accuracy. But most times those vision evals don't measure how clear it is at near point. And they don't measure the higher level visual skills of the two eyes working together as is necessary to read, or the eyes working with the brain. When we look at our watch and we say, I'm late, we have translated the big hand on one number and the little hand on another to a concept. And that's what vision is. It's conceptual. It's the brain focusing on and giving meaning to what is seen. When a baby looks at his mommy and says, Mama, that's a concept. That baby is perceiving that face as different from another woman's face. So vision is very complicated. It depends on the two eyes working together and the eyes working with the brain. And that's an important part of development that is not always understood.
Yeah. I've had the opportunity to get to know Dr. Bryce Applebaum quite well in the last couple of years, and he he's doing some tremendous things with, helping people improve their vision, which is another area where people just feel like it's just something that goes away. And he's done these intensives. And I know recently I saw Dr. Chatterjee was there, Dave Asprey's gone, Christine Burt, my business partner, has gone over there as well. And, quite exceptional what is actually able to happen when you sort of train the eyes, and you
Well,
bring
I'm
function back.
giggling because I helped Bryce Applebaum's father, Stanley Applebaum, start his practice.
No way.
Yep. And Bryce Applebaum's mother is an occupational therapist.
Wow.
And in the late 70s, early 80s, Stan and his wife Barbara started one of the very first OT practices where an optometrist and an occupational therapist work collaboratively to help kids with learning and behavior problems. And in the 80s, I put on two forums like the functional forums called the OT-OD collaboration. And I did one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. And we helped form other practices. Lynn Hellerstein, who's an optometrist in Denver, started a practice with her sister, Lynn Fishman, and several other practices were started because of that OT-OD symposiums that I did in the 80s. So
Wow.
I remember when Bryce Applebaum was born, and I'm giggling because we're now looking at him as the next generation who we are now depending upon to spread this word. It's just fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I want to honor, obviously, like all of the things that are happening right now in society, like we said, like from metabolic psychiatry for mental illness to the rethinking of how we take care of kids in the first day of life. All of this is built on decades of work by so many people who, in many cases, were actually just directly affected by something and were sort of, activated into work. But, I do think that, like you said, there is a new generation that is emerging. And I think that that's what's accelerating this movement forward. And I hope that in my lifetime, it'll be done. Like it'll just be a mission that has been achieved. And we have come around to realizing the downside of symptoms as a primary method of
Right.
understanding the human body, and that ultimately we're in a position where we understand what true health is and how to create health across a population.
I agree. And I think you're amazing that you think that this can happen in your lifetime. I hope you're right. When I founded Developmental Delay Resources in the 90s, my co-founder and I believed that within 5 or 10 years we wouldn't need this organization anymore because everybody would get it, right? The world would change. And 20 years later, when I handed it over to Epidemic Answers, now documenting hope, I was thankful that they were there and grateful that they could carry on the work. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And what I love about my new book is that it talks to this new generation of technologically savvy young doctors and practitioners because it has an AI companion to it. And this AI companion was started for me by an Australian dad who attributes his son's recovery from severe autism at 3 to typical development and better at 11 to my book, Outsmarting Autism. And he has gifted me this ChatGPT-like companion that searches my intellectual material in the same way that ChatGPT searches the internet. So if you go to ai.patricialemer.com and you can search, ask a question to the book and over 100 podcasts that I've done on my bi-monthly podcast called The Autism Detective. And it's remarkable. The book answers, or that the companion answers your question, your personalized question by looking in the book data and podcasts that I've done. And it even brings up a podcast of someone who I've interviewed and says, well, Dr. So-and-so answers this question. And Patti says, but this doctor says, would you like to hear his answer? And then you can click on that particular podcast, even with a timestamp, to be able to do it quickly and accurately. And in the not too distant future, it's going to also have a voice application so that not only do you get the typed in answer, I answer it in my own cloned voice that can
Nice.
that can be done in 70 languages. So you can ask a question, hopefully in French or Spanish or German, and it will answer you in your native language. It's like science fiction to me. I mean, when I grew up, we had a Dick Tracy watch that we hoped we could someday see who we were talking to, like you and I are talking. That was
Yeah.
science fiction when I was growing up, and now it's like just every day.
Just a normal way of being. Yeah. Well, why don't you project out a little bit further from here? I mean, why don't you say, like, in the next 10 years, you're still fully participating in, your mission and vision. What do you think you'd like to see as far as progress with, with the disease categories that you care about?
Oh, that's a great question. I would like to see educated parents have the health freedom to make educated decisions about the health of their children, and for them to be able to work collaboratively with their healthcare professionals. I listened to those hearings 2 days ago before they made this momentous decision today, and that was one of the big messages, that doctors listen to their patients, that they don't tell them what to do, that they offer them more than symptomatic relief, that they look at underlying causes, root causes, and that they themselves are educated about nutrition and movement and diet and the higher level thinking processes that are necessary to be able to think and work effectively. This is my hope. I'm turning 80 next year, and I want to be able to pass this information on. I'm fortunate to be mentoring a lot of young people, and this is just a great pleasure to me to be able to carry on this information and to pass my knowledge on, because I am not going to be here to do it. But what I've seen so in my lifetime, it's been a miracle. To get this Hep B shot out of the first 24 hours of life is a miracle. To be able to make our decisions about our kids, that be able for you to be able to start a school that has appropriate developmental milestones and respects children's need to play and children's bodies to move. It's just wonderful, James. It's just wonderful to be able to speak with you about how you changed your lifestyle. You changed your life to accommodate what you knew was appropriate development and not fall into this accelerated academic programming and the need for computers instead of real life experiences. Congratulations to you and what you've done.
Thank you. It's been a labor of love and it's very joyful. I'm in the part of it where I'm getting the benefit of it without so much work. It was a lot of work at the beginning, but now I have both kids go to that and have exactly what you said. It is developmentally appropriate. I've been thinking about a marketing campaign because so many people are realizing the downside of technology. Could you just, if you just send a message just saying like, come to the school where there's no technology? I mean, ultimately, I feel like that could just be enough. But, certainly the way, I think the most exciting thing that I see is just the will inside my eldest daughter, particularly, to follow her own ideas. And I was asked actually in an interview a few years into the Functional Forum by an old friend of mine, like, what is it that gave you the confidence in your own ideas to just go and do like you've done? And I'm not even sure what it was, but like, that is, if there's anything that I wanted to pass on to my daughter, it's that, because ultimately it's like, we need that. We need a lot more of that. And it's fun to live in a world where you get to, follow your own heart and your own mind. So
it's fun, and it's just so rewarding to watch these kids who have the confidence to forge ahead. And I think it's remarkable that you and I are here talking about this. Neither of us is a doctor, but both of us understand the front and the back. There's a Japanese saying, every front has a back. and the backside of all these good things like technology. You and I couldn't be doing this podcast today. I couldn't have an AI companion to my book without technology. But we don't want to misuse that technology with developing minds. Those developing minds have a different need, which is to move and play and experience life so that they gain confidence. That's the way conceptualization happens. And how far does your school go? Does it go beyond eighth grade?
No, just 8th grade.
Yeah. And then you've got the high school issue of what are we learning in high school that prepares us for life and not just for college? Are we going to teach cooking?
I don't know. We're going to cross that bridge when we come to it. I've got a few ideas, but we'll get to it.
The other thing is to get this message to the medical health world. The mental health world is stuck. It's stuck in psychiatry. It's stuck in do talk therapy and do medication. There's so much more available to our mentally ill patients than talk therapy and drugs. And we have to have our mental health professionals, our psychiatrists, our social workers, our counselors understand why they have to understand and talk about diet and sleep and movement, because those are the things that get us out of trouble. And what happens to people who've been traumatized? People are in fight and flight. And until we get to the nervous system that is dysregulated because of trauma, we're never going to be able to get to helping these people. And I attribute Neil Nathan to helping me understand the importance of this. He and I have had very parallel careers. We're exactly the same age. And it's been wonderful getting to know him lately and working with him. He was a big contributor to how this book, this total load theory book, is different from Outsmarting Autism, because he recognized he was doing all the right things with his patients, and some of them didn't get well. And the ones that didn't get well were the ones who were in fight or flight, who didn't feel safe, who were traumatized. And that is incorporated in my book, and why it is so important that we get out there to the ADHD and mental health population.
Yeah, I want to honor you and your book, and I'm super grateful to have had the opportunity to write the foreword. So if you're listening to this and you want a good read going, you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's called Total Load Theory, Transforming Lives in Autism, ADHD, LD, SPD, and Mental Health. It's published by Children's Health Defense. The foreword is by me. And, I also want to thank those who are listening to this, who are doing this work in the community, because ultimately, books and that kind of content can be really helpful to guide you in the right direction. But finding resources locally who can help reinforce that and help to, individualize it for you, that's what's really powerful. And, hopefully you are one of those resources, or we're building a network of those resources to help people in their journey. So, Patti, Thank you for being part of it, and thank you for your pioneering work.
Thank you, James, for having me on, and again for your wonderful foreword. I'm so appreciative.
Awesome. Well, this has been the Evolution of Medicine podcast. We've been here with Patti Lemer, and we will be putting all the details in the show notes about the book and how to get hold of the AI support. Thanks so much for tuning in. This has been the Evolution of Medicine podcast, and we'll see you next time.